All right, folks, it's Thursday, and for all my online clients, you know what that means. It's time to have a technical Thursday. So we're going to talk a little bit today about hernias and disc herniations. I've worked extensively with people with spaghetti hernias, sports hernias, inguinal hernias, and a couple of other umbilical hernias, that sort of stuff, and many people with herniated discs. Before I get into this, I will say this is not an all-encompassing discussion about causality, but it's certainly contributing factors. You can have genetic predispositions too, you can have structural abnormalities, of course, there can be trauma injuries. That is excluding those things. Okay? So the first thing I think of when I think of a hernia, you guys have never seen a hernia, Google umbilical hernia. It's going to be a big old lump sticking out. It's basically when your intestines kind of start to poke out through the abdominal wall. And it typically gets repaired with a mesh. And when you're a herniated disc, a disc is usually herniated posteriorly into one side. And a disc is pushed back and outwards kind of this way and squeezed. Okay? So, what do those things have in common? Number one is the treatment of them tends to be not super successful across the board for long term in my experience. That said, I obviously have selection bias where people come to see me when they don't have good results from those surgeries, from those things. I will say there is a relatively high failure rate for mesh repairs in hernias, and there's also a relatively high recurrence rate in herniated discs. If you have a herniated disc, by the way, folks, that is not a guarantee of pain whatsoever. Herniated discs, to some extent, are relatively normal, and most very severely herniated discs can spontaneously deherniate, or many can at least. If you're stuck with multiple herniated discs and surgery is looking like the only option, very often there are other ways to go. I had a young, and he's going to see this, he's going to love that I said he's young, a young jiu-jitsu professional recently who was supposed to get I think a 4 or 5 disc spinal fusion because he had, he had 4 or 5 herniated discs. There was some spinal stenosis, some spondylolisthesis, some foraminal narrowing, relatively normal stuff for an athletic human being in their 30s. We did 4 or 5 visits, and he doesn't have pain anymore. He's back to training hard. He thought he was going to be in significant surgery and be out for months. And all we did was, and in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I do not have direct data to back this up, but you have some mechanistic explanation. In my opinion, both hernias and herniated discs, absent major significant traumatic incidents, i.e. some shit smashed you, they usually have a relatively common root cause, and it's inappropriately managed internal pressure. This kind of dovetails with what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago in one of the other videos that's public, where I talked about not liking lifting belts because we want to be able to create our own intra-abdominal pressure as opposed to relying on an external implement. So, you guys, if you watch any of my videos, you've seen me use lots of implements like this. Okay, I want you to imagine that we are a series of interconnected meat balloons. Okay, we are meat balloons, it's what we are. There's a meat balloon or a thorax, a meat balloon or a pelvis, a meat balloon in our head, our cranium, our thorax, and our pelvis. Okay, each one of these has a diaphragm. Yes, I just said your head has a diaphragm. It is the hemipalate of the mouth. Each half of the palate can raise and move upwards and downwards pretty significantly in the grand scheme of things. You're not going to completely distort your whole head, but it can move the cranial bones and change pressure differentials in the head and face, and should do so when you walk, move, or do a bunch of other activities. But that's a long conversation we're not going to have today, because me just saying that cranial bones move is going to hurt someone's feelings in the comment who can't read. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the pelvis and the thorax. Again, if you guys have ever watched or ever listened to anything that I ever said, you'll know that I think breathing regulation is foundational because it's going to change the relationship of the pelvis to the thorax. Let's talk about that in the context of hernias. Umbilical hernias, anterior hernias of any form. Okay, soft tissue hernias. We've talked before multiple times, and I'm not going to go heavily into detail on it here because I've done so many times in the past on many other videos. When we inhale, this should drop down. This should not lift up. Okay? When this drops down, if the pelvic floor can't also drop down in parallel to one another, yes, in parallel, pelvic floor is a pelvic diaphragm. When we inhale, respiratory diaphragm should drop, pelvic floor should drop. When we exhale, both should come back up. Okay? Not a question, that is a statement. If this can go down, or go down somewhat, and this can't, we're going to pressurize the contents of this chamber, of this meat balloon. Those contents are intestines, viscera, organs, fluid, etc. Okay? If I pressurize these things here, they're going to have to go either front or backward. If I pierce a can of soda, this is a rhetorical question, I hope. If I pierce a can of soda, where does that thing go? It goes outwards. Why? Because it's a pressure differential. It goes from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. So as I overinflate this, it's going to try go through the area of least resistance, because that's what pressure does. So, one of the basic foundations of the physics in the universe, really, entropy. Things go from areas of high concentration to low concentration. But what's going to happen is we're going to have this high concentration of overinflation here, and it's going to push through the weakest area. If that's anterior, it could be an umbilical hernia. If it's posterior, that could be a herniated disc. But there we go. Now, if I have someone who's creating this overinflation from a poor respiratory position, and now they're using a belt, so this can no longer be the area of least resistance, I'm more likely, in my opinion, to get a herniated disc than an anterior hernia. If I have someone who's really elongated through abs, and you guys are him talking about all the time, who I don't like big arch back bench press, big arch back squats, big arch back deadlifts. Not that arching your back is wrong, but it's, in my opinion, wrong to do with significant heavy load if you want the person to be a healthy, athletic human being. That does not mean there are not sports specific, i.e. powerlifting, times when we would do it. Even in Olympic lifting, you're going to be in your triple extension midair and you're going to catch and load again and take yourself out of that position. So when we have this becoming the area of least resistance, because what have we done if we have that big arch back and elevatory pattern of breathing? We've elongated all of the abdominal muscles. They can no longer actually create appropriate tension, because muscles have a length-tension relationship. The longer they are, the less tension they can create. Therefore, the weaker that will be. Okay? There we go. Pelvic floor, same idea. If we have someone who's in a constant anterior tilt and they're drive forward, the ribs are up and back like this, where people think good posture is, and if I swear to God, if I get one more ad for these crappy posture things to pull your chest up and back, I want everyone who I hate to buy those, because that'd be great fun for everybody involved. That's a joke. If I don't like you, please don't buy one of those. When we get that inhalation, we get pulled up here, we get all this elongation, what we're also getting is an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, I'm going to exaggerate with the model because it's easier to see, but I want you guys to see this aperture, this hole here, okay? This is pretty much where the pelvic floor is, and it's a series of several muscles that control the SI joint and the ilial rotation, and a couple other things. But that's our diaphragm in the pelvis that controls pelvic pressure, okay? Inability to control pelvic floor is going to lead to things like urinary incontinence, anorgasmia or difficulty orgasming, potentially erectile dysfunction, and even in relatively young men, and even in relatively young men on PEDs, I've seen it in several clients who were competitive athletes in their 20s, taking lots of drugs, still couldn't get the dick to work because they had pelvic floor dysfunction. It is an important thing we don't talk about enough. Postpartum in women, it's very often associated with urinary incontinence. You sneeze, you laugh, jump, you get a little bit of pee coming out. But that's not even just postpartum anymore. I see it more and more often in women in their 20s who are doing a lot of gym work. Reason being, one of the reasons being at least, when we anterior tilt the pelvis, and for all those chest up, shoulders back people, this aperture in here where the pelvic floor lives, now you can see the inside coming, this bottom part is coming in, but look at my middle fingers moving further apart. Now obviously we're not going to go to that extent, right? We're not going to completely do that. But what we're doing is we're elongating all the muscles that can actually control intrapelvic pressure, that can regulate that pressure. So as we get this overinflation, overexpansion in the meat balloon up here, we're also going to get one down here as it's pushing down and expanding. That's going to lead to things, or at the very least, exacerbate the possibility and chance of things like inguinal hernias. Okay? It's pressure dysregulation at its simplest. It's not that simple, but you guys get what I'm talking about, okay? That is not, again, a be-all and end-all. We can have structural defects. There can be certain drugs that are going to weaken connective tissue. I believe prednisone or cortisone or some of the steroidal anti-inflammatories can probably exacerbate the possibility of these things happening. We can have structural deficits. But I'm just saying, in general, when I see people with these issues, so long as they do not have an actively protruding hernia, which I'm not touching with the barge pole, go see a surgeon or at least a doctor to try and to replace it appropriately, because I'm not doing that. That's beyond my pay grade. And what my insurance will cover. But once we have not an active protruding hernia, I've had maybe 24 people in the last 5-6 years have full resolution in their hernias through just respiratory work and repositioning work. Similarly, I've literally lost count of the amount of people I've had with herniated disc and disc issues. I know it's at least 10 people who've avoided scheduled spine surgery from doing this. That's not saying your spine's going to be perfect, but also perfect spines don't exist once we're past teen years. You're going to see some slight scoliosis, not that weird, some slight foraminal narrowing if you're an athletic human being, and some disc herniation. But that disc herniation, in my opinion, again, guys, I always try and delineate between facts and opinion. In my opinion, is more likely when we have severe disc herniation and repeated disc herniation due to pressure imbalance and or behavioral stuff like lifting incorrectly or suboptimally. Okay? I didn't want to make this a long video. I just wanted to get you guys thinking about causality between hernias, disc herniations, and those sorts of issues, and internal pressure regulation. When we have this overexpansion I talked about, when the anterior abdomen, i.e. belly breathing, happens, what happens to the discs as well? Boop, they get crunched together. That may be a contributor in back pain for a lot of people because we're going to have hypertonic erectors. Those low back muscles are going to be pulling those vertebrae every time we lift or do anything else because it's going to take leverage away from the hamstrings, coming back to our length-tension relationship. Anyway, TLDR of this video, if you have hernias or herniations or a history of them, particularly if you've had surgeries that have failed, or you have chronic low back pain, there's a very good chance it can be fixed non-surgically. And here's the best part. Even if it does need to get fixed surgically, giving yourself appropriate motor patterning in the muscles around that area are very likely going to help speed up your return to sport or just your return to day-to-day general life activity without pain and with better motor patterning. So going the conservative route in terms of treatment is rarely a bad place to start, so long as you're with a skilled professional.